2 years ago, as I was going through my grandfather's personal effects after his funeral, I found a box full of photographs and a few books from his time as a young man in North Korea. He was 18 years old when he and his family suddenly left his hometown of Samdung. The following, it's an excerpt from one of his personal journals, a journal he kept as he followed his parents south, across what would eventually become the demilitarized zone years later. I have translated this to the best of my ability, with some help from my family. August 18th, 1945. We were waiting on the north shore of the Gang River for the boat that would ferry us to safety in a town on the other side. Father was talking to the men who had arranged to take us across. He should not speak too much. This is what got us into this mess in the first place. He likes to talk, mainly about things of which he knows very little, like God. What possessed him to take on the role of church elder 5 years ago, we will never know. My mother protested at the time, accusing him of taking on the Americans' religion. She was wrong, of course. Father was not baptized into Christianity for the sake of pleasing any outsiders, although he did like to please people. Father truly believed. He was a true convert to the religion of blood and broken bones on a broken cross. He sang the Western hymns. I had never known a Korean man to sing so much about the state of his heart. It was shameful to me, and I knew that it was embarrassing to Mother. So when the pastor came to our house last night, warning Father of the approaching communists, I understood why Mother yelled at him when the pastor left. He had brought danger upon our house, our family. I heard the pastor tell Father, "You are target number 1." I understood that. Father is easily the most Western man in Samdung. He inherited his taste for fedoras and slim cigarettes from the Americans who would occasionally wander through town, praising the virtues of hard work and personal accountability. In our steel factory, he instituted the practice of bonus pay for workers who, in his eyes, earned it. Of course, this rattled the local communists, but they were such a minority that Father found them easy to ignore. Until yesterday. So here we were, in late summer, the sun beginning its steady decline under the horizon, lighting up the clouds in a dazzling display, as if reminding us that all things have their moment in the sun, until darkness falls, drowning all dreams. Taihan was feeling a chill, so Mother wanted to start a fire, but the men, they forbade her. They said it would attract attention. My mother then said that we were too far from the road for anyone to notice. And then one of the men said, "Not the notice of men." The other men looked away, as if hiding a shameful secret. Or fear. It was the way that children look away when forced to admit a phobia of heights or spiders. My mother asked how they were supposed to cook our dinner, and the men just shrugged again. Frustrated, my mother uncovered a large pot of cold rice and another of stringed spicy beans and served them to everyone, including the men. Father then called for everyone to bow their heads for grace, and that is when one of the men grabbed Father's arm. "Don't," he said. "Not here." Father looked at him, challengingly. "He who does not give thanks for small blessings, give thanks for nothing," Father said. "You have it wrong," said the man. "We are very thankful, especially for our lives. That is why we would rather you didn't pray." The other men grumbled in agreement. I had no idea what he was talking about. Father straightened his back, his palms out, as if Jesus himself before a crowd. "Brothers, what do you have against praying? Are we among friends or not?" Father scanned all their faces. "We have nothing against prayer," said the man, "but something does." "What do you mean, something?" asked Father. The man said nothing and turned his head towards the river. I peered out over its dark waters. It was wide, and it looked much too fast to swim safely. It meandered silently around the next bend, the shores gently sloping into the currents. Was there something in the river? Is that what he meant? I stared at that river for the rest of the evening as my parents prepared our camp. The ferry was not due until the morning. I awoke in the middle of the night under a ceiling of stars and a half moon off to the south, where we were hoping to be. Taihan was pressed up against me, rolled up in his blankets from head to toe. My nose, it was cold to the touch, so I pulled Taihan's blanket gently up over his face. I turned towards the sounds that had woken me. Father was still up, talking to one of those men. They were standing closer to the river. I strained my neck to try to hear what they were saying. "I worry about my youngest," I heard Father say. "He is not built strong. My oldest, I worry about too, but only because he wants to be a writer one day." The other man chuckled quietly. I could see them passing a clay bowl of Macaulay back and forth. "Why did you not want me to pray?" asked Father. The man finished taking a large sip from the clay bowl before passing it back to Father. "You ever have those American Christians pass through Samdong?" "Of course," said Father. "We had one here with his wife 5 years ago. He was a good speaker, so when he announced a baptism in the river, everyone came." Father passed the bowl back to the man, who took another sip from it before continuing. "I think there were almost 300 people here, lined up to be baptized. People were being dunked and they yelled with joy at the promise of salvation. And then, this woman gave him her son. They were well known here. She was a pansori singer. Not the best, but she put a lot of emotion into her singing. He accompanied her on a barrel drum, even though he had some kind of handicap. He was very thin, and drool ran down the side of his mouth. He had trouble walking too. But he could still hit that drum hard, with passion. Anyway, when she showed up with her son, you could see the American was nervous. I can still see him, taking the boy, struggling to get him in the water. And you could tell this boy wanted no part of this. He was gripping a small bouquet of yellow lilies he had picked that day. We would always see him in our streets with such an arrangement of flowers. He would sit next to his mother, singing and begging for money or food. His mother was known to tell the neighbors how yellow was a calming color for him. So when a Japanese soldier handed him some while marching through our town, the boy was entranced. But on the day of his baptism, I remember the way he turned his face towards his mother. Even though his condition made his face always look sad, I could tell that he was even sadder, crushed that he had to do this to please his mother. And I can tell you, she did not understand what baptism was. She thought that God had cursed her son, and that if the boy was baptized, God would heal him. So when the boy felt the strange, white man speaking in an alien tongue and putting his hands on him, and the man started pulling him backwards into the deep, cold water, the boy began to panic He began kicking and screaming. At one point, he even hit the man in the face. But the man kept pulling, yelling even louder, looking up at the sky. He tried pushing the boy's head in the water, but the boy kept on fighting. So the man pulled him into the deeper current, trying his best to calm the panicking boy. And then the man slipped. His feet had given way under the water. But by this point, he was the boy's only source of balance. So when the man went underwater, so did the boy. The mother started screaming. Men jumped in the river, and by the time the first man reached the American and pulled him up out of the water, the boy was gone. And then we heard the mother screaming, pointing downriver, and I saw the head of the boy bobbing up and down in the current before he disappeared around the far bend over there. I could barely make out, in the faint moonlight, an arm outstretched to the west. Father had not spoken during this whole time, which is a rare occurrence. Having Father interrupt speakers was, for him, a part of the storytelling experience. A story was not a story unless he could somehow insert himself into it. If it was some small, local gossip, my father somehow knew the subject of the scandal. If it was a tale of the beginning of the universe and God's intention for it, my father knew he was part of that purpose. So it surprised me that he actually listened. Then, Father spoke. What happened to the boy? We found his body on the far shore, a few miles downstream, he said. His mother was now alone in the world, except for a few neighbors who didn't much like the woman, but still felt sorry for her son. The man then cleared his throat. He was still clutching those flowers when they found him. I could see Father turn fully towards the river, his back to me, and I heard him drink deeply from the bowl. That is tragic, said Father. They buried him out in that field, said the man, pointing to a place that I could not see. His mother made sure to keep his tombstone adorned with the fresh, yellow lilies, the ones the Japanese brought over from Mount Osama. The ones her son would always carry around. Is his mother still here? Asked Father. I heard the man's footsteps on the stony beach as he paced around. She was inconsolable, he said. She would stand in the town centre and sing Panzori by herself. No drum, just her voice echoing loudly through the streets. She had no tone, no drama, just the same level of emotion in every line, like some street merchant calling out her wares in the alleys. And it was always the same song. The man now crouched dramatically, and in his best Pansori voice began to howl these words. You came to me in the light of the moon, and that is how you left me, my boy, my sweet, innocent child. The waters took you from me, and I need you to return. Come back to me, or prepare a place for me beside you, where darkness hides my shame. I was moved. I'd heard Pansori many times, but this particular rendition of her mournful wailing, knowing it was about real, fresh loss, it struck me deeply. She sang this every hour, every day, for many days, he continued, now standing upright, taking a deep drink after his performance. I like a good Pansori here and there, but without the drum, it's just a crazy, lonely woman crying in the streets. But you have not answered my question. Is she still living in town? Said Father. In town? Yes, the man answered. But not living. He turned and pointed somewhere that I, again, could not see. She is buried next to her son. They found her by the river, very close to where they found her son. She threw herself into the river? Asked Father. That is what most say, said the man. But there is another theory, a rumor. The man looked around before continuing. Some say that they saw something climbing out of the river a few nights after the child's death. It had a human shape, and it limped, just like the boy. I could hear him taking a long drink before continuing. Some feared that it was the ghost of the boy. Some think that it was the boy himself, returned from the grave in bodily form. And some, he said, some people believe that the boy is a holy abomination, a product of a failed baptism. And it is these stories that make some people believe that he crawled out of that water to take his mother with him. He heard her songs, and being the obedient, dutiful son, he complied. I suddenly felt the cold wrap itself around me. My ears and nose chilled from the exposure. And then I heard Father praying. "What are you doing?" protested the man. "We do not pray by this river. If there is a curse here, it must be lifted through prayer," said Father. "Through God comes all grace." "There is no room for grace here," said the man, his voice rising. "Your prayers will seem like mockery to him. You will stir his anger." In the dim light, I saw Father standing near the shore, his arms raised to heaven. A hushed prayer stole forth from his lips, and I could hear the river churning, massive, eternal, moving. It was well past midnight when I awoke again. It was a sound, a splash, as if someone were bathing in the river. But I could have been dreaming, given the stories I'd heard that night. I was still groggy from sleep. I turned to Taihan, thinking it might have been him who made that sound. I carefully sat up, without disturbing anyone, and I looked up at the sky. Stars were everywhere, and the moon now hung higher in the night sky, lighting up the trees and hills around us. Father was still not back in his bedroll. I silently moved away from the makeshift camp in search of him. That is when I heard it. At first, it was so faint, I thought it was the breeze whistling through the trees. But then it grew steadily in volume to a hoarse whisper. And then, through the trees, the words drifted towards me. "I have waited in darkness, my everlasting night, your spark of days." It sounded like the low, barely coherent sing-song ramblings of a drunken man, quietly growling a lazy pansori. It sounded like it could have been any one of the men from the village we had met earlier that day. So I walked towards the voice. I thought if I followed the drunk, I would find Father. I cautiously walked towards the sound, but I had to be careful. It might be one of the men just relieving himself in the bushes, singing his inebriated tune to himself. My eyes were adjusting to the moonlight when I saw the figure slowly stumbling under the trees. He was clearly drunk, but instead of returning to the camp, the man walked further away from the river. I followed, at a distance. I could see something in his hand as he swung his arms, probably a jar of makgeolli or soju. He still sang as he walked, his voice a soft, raspy timbre, as if he were in pain. "The water does not soothe nor save. Its chill stings like a flame of ice. He was bent over, lurching with each step, one arm by his side, as if paralyzed. I followed, slowly, cautiously, careful to stay in the shadows in case Father suddenly caught me. I lost track of how long I had been following this man, when I realized I could no longer hear the river. I had been engaged in my crouching and hiding from tree to tree for quite a while. I looked farther ahead, and I saw that the man had left the trees, and he was now shuffling through some tall grass in a clearing. Father was nowhere to be seen, but I thought perhaps he was passed out in that field ahead, and this man was returning to him with another jar. I was so low in the grass that I was almost crawling. I occasionally propped myself up on one knee to make sure the man was still in sight. And that is when he sang the words that I know will haunt me for the rest of my life. "Oh Mother, I have come for you. The waters have washed me clean, and they will cleanse you too. So we may together rest on the cool stones where the deep hides all the secrets." I was frozen to my spot, crouched, hidden by the grass. I found myself trying not to breathe for fear of being heard. And then, as carefully as I could, I peered over the grass. I could see him limping away from me in the light of the moon. His last words, they wrought deep with pain, laced with a terrifying sadness I had never heard before. Then he stopped. I could see his silhouette. His head, it turned toward something on the ground. He stooped down, and I heard something that chilled me even more. I heard weeping, but this time, his voice was different, changed. It was the crying of a boy. Frightened beyond my wits, I crouched as low as I could. I was too afraid to look, for fear of not only being seen by him, but of seeing his face. It was not something I wanted to look at, for his moon-tinged figure and the ghostly sound of his voice had already sent my imagination reeling at the possible horror producing those sounds. I had once seen a body dragged out of a river. It had been face down for many days when it was finally found. The face looked melted, the eyes eaten away by fish, the hair long and wispy, plastered to the forehead. That image now came to my mind as I fought the temptation to see it suddenly animated, its low, hanging mouth coming for me. And then I heard its footsteps, closer than I had remembered them to be. I looked up just in time to see the top of his head moving towards me. And then I ran. I had never run so fast in my life. I didn't even look behind me for fear of seeing him, hovering right over my shoulder, reaching a ghastly, decomposing hand towards me. I found myself running out from under the tree canopy and hurdling the logs lit by the moon. And as I raced forward, I suddenly saw the outline of my family's camp. I stopped. I did not want to lure this thing toward my family. I was shaking, but I had no choice. And slowly, I turned to confront my fate. This entity that did not belong to this soil. And there was nothing there. I scanned my surroundings. All was clear. It was all stillness and silence. My breath, it was coming in heaves, and then, feeling dizzy, I bent over and vomited onto the grass. I must have collapsed, because that is where Mother found me. I was woken at the break of dawn with her kneeling over me, gently slapping my cheeks. She yelled for help and a blanket, while others rushed to start a fire to warm my body. I was shaking from a night spent out in the cold. "Where is your father?" Mother asked in a panic. I had no idea what she was talking about. Surely father would have made his way back to camp by now. Even though he liked to drink, that never stopped him from returning to my mother's arms. Men were scurrying everywhere, calling out to each other as they searched along the riverbank. Several hours later, father was still missing. We didn't know what to do. Taihan was crying, worried about father. Mother put on a brave face for us, but I could tell from the men's faces that they had very little confidence in my father's safety. "He should not have prayed over by the river," said a voice. I turned to see the man who had been drinking with father last night. Some men nodded their heads. Mother was of course too distracted to notice. The ferry was coming at any moment, and father was nowhere to be found. Most of our money had been spent arranging this boat to take us safely to a village on the other side of this river, several miles upstream. If we missed this boat, we were stuck, and the communists would surely find us. Mother was pacing, distraught, knowing that if father did not show up, we would have to leave without him. That is what he would expect of us. I rose to my feet, feeling slightly better, wrapped in the warmth of a blanket. I told Mother that I needed to find a private place in the woods. She told me to make it quick and to cover it up so no one steps on it. I looked at the line of trees and started walking. After a few minutes, I was back in the place that I'd run through just hours earlier. But now, there was no horror here, just the tranquility of the forest. I kept walking, and I soon found myself back in the clearing, where in the clarity of day, I could see the beauty of the place, nestled in a peaceful mountain valley. The tall grass waved slowly, like seaweed. I kept walking to where I had seen him stoop. And there it was, in the middle of the field. Tombstones, lots of them. I was standing in the center of a makeshift cemetery. And off to the side, I found the ones that I knew would be there. 2 unmarked graves. One of them with fresh, yellow lilies laying on top of it.